Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest coastline, a group of people in a wooden canoe spotted land they had no way of knowing existed. No compass, no map, no written instructions of any kind. And they weren't lost. They meant to find it. By the time this story is over, our species had walked, paddled, and sailed its way onto every continent on Earth except Antarctica. And the how of it is stranger and smarter than almost anyone gives it credit for. Start with the least glamorous explanation possible: food. Ancient hunter-gatherers weren't migrating for the thrill of new horizons. They were following herds, tracking seasonal plants, and moving on once local resources thinned out. A single group might shift only a modest distance in one lifetime, but stretch that modest drift across hundreds or thousands of generations, and you get distances that are genuinely staggering. This wasn't one person walking from Africa to Australia in a single heroic journey. It was a slow, multi-generational ripple, each generation pushing the edge of known territory a little further outward. And the human body was genuinely built for this. Our efficient sweating system, upright walking gait, and endurance for sustained moderate exertion made long-distance travel almost routine. Research on traditional walking-based societies has found that covering 10 to 20 miles a day on foot, carrying supplies, wasn't some extraordinary feat. It was simply normal for bodies conditioned to it from childhood. But endurance alone doesn't explain how people avoided starving, getting lost, or walking straight into disaster. That took something else, an entire accumulated science that never got written down. Reading landscape features to find water, recognizing seasonal weather patterns specific to a region, knowing which plants signal a hidden spring nearby. None of this was figured out by one person on one trip. It was generations of observation, passed down orally, giving ancient travelers a level of confidence in unfamiliar terrain that a modern person, dropped into the same landscape with zero preparation, would struggle to match. Here's where the story gets more interesting than humans just walked everywhere. Because part of this wasn't willpower at all. It was timing. Genetic and archaeological evidence points to early Homo sapiens leaving Africa via specific corridors, including a crossing at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which during certain Ice Age periods of lower sea level was considerably narrower than it is today. And that pattern repeats on a much larger scale with the Bering Land Bridge during the last glacial period. So much of the planet's water was locked into ice sheets that sea levels dropped enough to expose a wide land connection between Siberia and Alaska. Ancient people didn't cross into the Americas by boat. They simply walked, following game animals across ground that's now buried under open ocean. If a shortcut like that existed for the Americas, subscribe, because what happened with Australia had no shortcut at all, and it's the most impressive part of this entire story. Even at the lowest sea levels of the last ice age, the water gap between Southeast Asia and Australia never fully closed. There was no land bridge, no walkable path, just open ocean, wide and deep enough to remain open water through the most extreme glacial periods on record. And yet the evidence shows humans reached Australia at least 65,000 years ago, using some form of deliberate watercraft. That's earlier than almost any other confirmed maritime crossing anywhere in the ancient world, accomplished with less sophisticated boat technology than later voyagers would eventually develop. Exactly what those boats looked like, and how sophisticated the navigation was, remains a genuinely open question in archaeology today. But the basic fact stands. People were deliberately crossing open ocean tens of thousands of years earlier than popular history usually credits them for. That brings us to the achievement this video is really building toward: Polynesian ocean voyaging, which represents something categorically different from a lucky crossing. Polynesian navigators colonized remote Pacific islands, separated by vast stretches of open ocean, using double-hulled canoes carrying entire founding populations. People, plants, and animals, all deliberately packed for permanent settlement. This wasn't accidental drift. The presence of breeding populations of specific crops and livestock aboard these canoes makes that clear. These were planned colonization voyages by people who fully expected to find land. And the navigation method behind it deserves real respect. Without instruments or written charts, Polynesian navigators built an integrated mental system from star patterns, ocean swell direction, cloud formations, and even the flight patterns of specific seabird species known to nest on particular islands, all passed down through intensive oral apprenticeship. Skilled navigators could reportedly detect an island they couldn't yet see, purely from subtle disruptions in the surrounding wave pattern. A level of environmental sensitivity modern researchers have found genuinely difficult to replicate, even with dedicated training. Boat technology itself wasn't one invention spreading outward from a single source. It was independently reinvented everywhere, shaped by local materials and conditions. Reed boats around the Mediterranean and parts of South America, dugout canoes carved from single logs across river and coastal cultures worldwide, skin-covered frame boats in Arctic regions where wood was scarce, but hide and bone weren't. Overland travel got its own transformation once pack animals entered the picture. Horses, camels, donkeys, and llamas dramatically expanded how much a group could carry, and how far it could go without relying purely on human muscle. Camels in particular deserve specific credit. Their tolerance for extreme heat and ability to go far longer without water than most large mammals made them indispensable across the Sahara, Arabia, and Central Asia, especially once effective saddle design let riders and cargo travel securely across terrain that would otherwise be brutal to cross on foot. And travel wasn't only about migration. An enormous amount of it was trade. Archaeologists regularly find specific types of stone, shell, and other raw materials hundreds or even thousands of miles from their point of origin, proving that trade networks connected communities across genuinely vast distances long before anything resembling modern transportation existed. None of this happened without real risk, and it's worth being honest about that. Long-distance travel into unfamiliar territory carried genuine danger: starvation, dehydration, unfamiliar disease, conflict with populations already occupying the land, or simple miscalculation of resources. The successful migrations are the ones that left evidence behind for us to study now, which almost certainly means a considerable number of attempts failed, sometimes catastrophically, and left nothing behind at all. Rivers deserve their own mention here too, often overlooked as travel corridors in their own right. The Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus. These weren't just the backbone of the agricultural civilizations we associate with them. They were highways, letting people, goods, and ideas move efficiently across huge distances long before roads existed. And in the Arctic, populations pushed even further, developing sled technology paired with domesticated dogs specifically bred for pulling, the only practical way to move efficiently through cold and terrain that would make standard walking lethal. Modern genetics has actually sharpened this whole picture considerably. Analyzing genetic markers across living populations worldwide lets researchers trace migration routes and timing with a precision archaeological remains alone often can't provide, since physical evidence frequently doesn't survive the scale of time involved. So how did ancient humans actually spread across nearly the entire planet? Not through one brilliant invention or one heroic journey. Through slow generational drift following resources. A body built for sustained walking. An enormous inherited library of environmental knowledge. Smart use of temporary climate-driven shortcuts like exposed land bridges. Genuinely sophisticated, independently invented boat technology and navigation systems. Domesticated animals expanding what overland travel could achieve. And trade networks binding it all together, long before anyone would have called it a network at all. We got here the same way we got everywhere else in this series. Patient, accumulated knowledge, refined generation after generation, and the simple willingness to walk, or sail, just a little further than whoever came before.